He is standing on a beach in South Africa. His flippers are pressed flat against his sides. His black and white chest rises and falls with each breath. He weighs exactly 7 pounds, and the sand beneath him is cold in the way that the Western Cape always is. Even in summer, even at midday, the Benguela current running so close to shore that the water never quite forgets where it came from. He is not moving. He is not eating. He is not calling out. He is simply standing beside a man who is sitting cross-legged on the sand in a weathered canvas jacket and work boots, and the bird is leaning against the man's leg, pressing his small, dense body into the human's shin the way a dog would. The man does not move. The bird does not move. They watch the waves come in together, and if you did not know the distance this animal had just traveled, you might think nothing of it. You might walk right past them. You might smile and keep walking. But if you knew what this bird had crossed to get here, if you understood the biology that makes this moment not just unlikely but functionally impossible, you would stop walking. You would stand very still. And you would understand that what you are looking at is not a scene from a nature documentary. It is something closer to a proof that the things we cannot explain are sometimes the most real things of all. To understand this, we have to start with a question that no biologist has fully answered. Why does a wild animal, an animal with no cage, no leash, no conditioning, no trained behavior, choose to return to a single human being year after year, crossing 8,000 kilometers of open ocean to do it? What is being felt on the other side of that choice? What name do we give it when the science of instinct has run out of runway and something else is clearly in the room? To understand that, we have to go back past the bird and the man on the beach, back to what the South Atlantic looked like before we turned it into a system of consequences. The Benguela Current once held one of the densest concentrations of marine life on the planet. This cold upwelling, rising from the deep floor of the South Atlantic along the western coast of southern Africa, pushed nutrient-rich water to the surface in volumes that no industrial fishing fleet could have imagined depleting. Anchovies in clouds that darkened the water for miles. Pilchards in formations so thick that fishermen in the early 20th century spoke of being able to scoop them out with their hands. The African penguin, a species that evolved to hunt in exactly these waters, thrived in colonies that researchers in the 1930s estimated at more than 4 million individuals. Let that number sit. 4 million. Breeding pairs covering the rocky islands off the South African and Namibian coasts in densities so extraordinary that the guano they produced was harvested industrially, a resource so thick and so valuable that the islands were worked like mines. If you stood on Dyer Island or Dassin Island at the peak of the species in 1930 and looked across the rocks, you were not looking at a few birds. You were looking at a living continent. A civilization of animals that had organized itself around the same cold upwelling for millions of years, operating on schedules so precise that the word clockwork feels inadequate. Then we arrived with our nets and our tankers and our ambitions, and the water changed. The guano scraping destroyed the nesting habitat. The purse seine trawlers that arrived in force in the 1950s and 1960s dismantled the anchovy and pilchard stocks that the penguins depended on with a speed that astonished even the fishing industry's own scientists. By 1956, the South African pilchard catch had peaked at 410,000 tons per year. Within 2 decades, the stock had collapsed so severely that the industry itself was forced to impose moratoriums. The fish had not disappeared entirely. They had moved. Under the combined pressure of industrial extraction and ocean warming, the anchovy shoals migrated eastward, away from the cold upwelling zones where penguins had hunted for millennia, toward the warmer waters around Port Elizabeth and beyond. The penguins, whose entire migratory and foraging biology was built around the Benguela system, did not follow easily. Their colonies were anchored to specific islands. Their navigation was calibrated to specific currents. The prey moved. The birds could not simply reorganize a million years of instinct in a generation. They began swimming further. Then they began starving. Then they began washing up on beaches. From 4 million individuals in 1930, the African penguin population declined to fewer than 50,000 breeding pairs by 2019. Let that second number sit beside the first. 4 million to fewer than 100,000 total birds in less than a century. The IUCN listed the species as endangered in 2010, with population models suggesting that without significant intervention, the African penguin could be functionally extinct in the wild within decades. Not in the distant future, within the lifetimes of people alive today. Along the Western Cape coast, which has always been penguin territory, this collapse became visible in ways that were impossible to ignore. Birds appearing on suburban beaches. Penguins found in parking lots, in gardens, on the stopes of houses in the fishing villages between Cape Town and Cape Agulhas. Their bodies depleted, their orientation broken, their fat reserves gone. Exhausted animals in states of malnourishment that wildlife rescuers described with words that kept returning to the same place. They had simply run out of sea. In some years, the Southern African Foundation for the Conservation of Coastal Birds, the organization that became the primary rescue infrastructure for stranded penguins on this coast, processed more than 3,000 individual birds in a single season. 3,000 animals, each one with a body built for cold, upwelling water and dense fish shoals, lying on warm sand or tarmac or someone's front lawn, dying of the accumulated consequences of choices made by people who would never see them. It was in this context, on a beach near the small fishing community of Betty's Bay on the Western Cape, that a man named Samuel Abrahams found a bird in 2011 that was not going to survive the morning. Samuel was not a scientist. He was not a conservation worker. He was a retired harbor hand, 73 years old, who had spent 40 years working the fishing boats out of Hermanus and Stompie, and who lived alone now in a small whitewashed house near the water, and spent his mornings on the beach the way old men in coastal towns sometimes do, walking slowly, watching things. What he found that particular morning was an African penguin, lying on the rocks near the water's edge, barely breathing, covered from beak to flipper in oil. Not a light slick, not a sheen. Oil deep in the feathers, matted and thick. The kind of coverage that means a bird has swum through a spill and cannot regulate its body temperature and will be dead within hours if the oil is not removed. Samuel picked him up. He carried him home. He cleaned him. This is a sentence that takes 2 seconds to read and probably 6 hours to understand, because cleaning oil off a bird that is also dying of hypothermia and exhaustion is not a gentle task. The oil must be removed with dish soap and warm water, feather by feather, with the knowledge that the bird you are handling is stressed beyond its physiological limits, and that your hands, your smell, your noise are adding to that stress at the same moment that they are saving the animal's life. Samuel did it anyway. He cleaned the bird, he fed him pilchards, he kept him warm, he named him Stompie. Stompie recovered. It took about 2 weeks. And at the end of those 2 weeks, when Samuel took him back to the water and set him down at the edge of the sea, the bird walked in, swam out, dove, surfaced, and then swam back to shore. He climbed out of the water and walked back to Samuel and stood beside him. Samuel took him back to the water. Stompie swam out and came back. Samuel tried 3 more times. Stompie came back each time, so Samuel stopped trying. He let the bird make his own choice. Stop and think about this. A 7-pound animal with a brain the size of a walnut and instincts honed by millions of years of evolution. An animal with no language, no concept of debt or gratitude as we formally define those things. An animal whose species had spent its entire evolutionary history in profound wariness of human beings, had just chosen, freely, to stay. Stompie stayed for 10 months. For 10 months he slept in Samuel's house. He waddled through the living room in the way that penguins do, with that rolling side-to-side gait that looks like a toddler wearing swim fins. He followed Samuel to the beach in the mornings. He ate the pilchards Samuel brought him. He sat beside the old man when Samuel listened to the evening radio. Neighbors stopped by. They photographed him. They laughed at the absurdity of a penguin listening to the Cape Town weather report in a retired harbor hand's living room. And then, when the season turned, Stompie stood up one morning, walked to the water, and was gone. He was gone for 8 months. Samuel waited. He went to the beach every morning. He told people what had happened. Most of them were polite and said very little. Some of them suggested gently that he not expect the bird to return. Animals did not work that way, wild animals especially. An animal that had been free and healthy would not choose to cross thousands of kilometers of open ocean to return to a man on a beach. This was the scientific consensus. It was also, it turns out, completely wrong. In the following season, Stompie came back. He swam up onto the beach at Betty's Bay, walked across the sand, and found Samuel. Not the beach. Samuel specifically. He could have landed anywhere along miles of coastline. He did not. He came back to the man who had cleaned the oil off his feathers one careful handful at a time, and he pressed himself against the man's leg the way you press yourself against the thing in the world that means safety. Samuel wept. He will tell you this himself. He does not try to explain it. He simply says, "He knows me," and leaves it there, because that is the only sentence that fits. African penguins, we should understand, are not social animals in the way that dogs or elephants or primates are. They form pair bonds with mates that can last a lifetime, and they are intensely loyal to those bonds, but they do not form broad social attachments. They do not bond with non-mates. They especially do not bond with other species. The literature on interspecies attachment in wild seabirds is sparse because it almost never happens. Birds in general, and seabirds in particular, relate to other animals through a very simple framework: threat or non-threat. A human being on a beach is, historically and behaviorally, almost always a threat. The African penguin's natural response to human contact is to flee or to bluff charge and deliver a beak strike that can break the skin. Not to lean, not to press, not to follow. What Stompie was doing had no category. Biologists who heard about the story were skeptical at first. Then they came to see. A researcher from the University of Cape Town's Fitzpatrick Institute of African Ornithology visited Samuel and Stompie and spent time observing them together. Her assessment was direct. The bird would allow Samuel to touch him, stroke him, carry him, but would not tolerate the same contact from anyone else. When strangers approached too closely, Stompie would pull back, lower his head, and brace. When Samuel reached down, Stompie leaned in. The researcher did not have a clinical term for what this was. She said something that was more honest than a clinical term would have been. She said the penguin had clearly made a choice, and the choice was this man. That observation came from a scientist, not a storyteller, not a person who anthropomorphizes things for the pleasure of the narrative. A researcher looking at the evidence in front of her and using the only language that matched what she saw. Now, if you are here, watching this channel, you are someone who believes that these stories matter. You believe that the bonds between animals and the humans who choose to see them are not sentimental diversions from the real world, but dispatches from the real world's deepest territory. This channel exists because of you. And every time you subscribe, every time you share one of these stories, you are not just adding a number to a count. You are telling the algorithm that animals are worth the time. You are saying that a 73-year-old man on a beach in South Africa and a 7-pound bird who chose to come back deserve an hour of the world's attention. If you believe that, subscribe and come back with us now, because what happened next is the part of this story that moves from unlikely to genuinely, structurally inexplicable. Stompie returned the following year, and the year after that, and the year after that. Every year, in the same season, the bird arrives. He swims up onto the beach at Betty's Bay. He finds Samuel. He stays for several months. When his instinct for breeding drives him back toward his nesting grounds, he goes. And then he comes back. 8 years of this, then 10, then more. The same bird. Samuel has had Stompie checked by veterinarians and wildlife officers from SANCOB, the Southern African Foundation for the Conservation of Coastal Birds, who have confirmed the identity through physical measurements and banding records. It is the same animal, returning from the same 8,000-kilometer journey, to the same stretch of coastline, to the same man, year after year. Think about what that navigation requires. An African penguin migrating from its feeding grounds in the cold Benguela upwelling zones to its nesting colonies on the offshore islands is using a suite of biological tools that neuroscientists do not fully understand. Magnetic field detection through magnetite particles in the beak, star navigation, wave and current pattern recognition, solar compass orientation. These are not metaphors. These are documented biological mechanisms operating simultaneously in a brain that weighs less than a golf ball. The bird is crossing open ocean without landmarks, without GPS, without anything we would recognize as a map, and arriving at a precise location on a coastline thousands of kilometers from where it started. This is already extraordinary. Now add the additional variable that the bird is not navigating to a breeding ground or a feeding ground. It is navigating to a person. It is treating a human being as a destination in the same way that it treats the granite rocks of Dyer Island as a destination. It has placed a man inside the same neural architecture that it uses to find its mate. Whatever is happening inside Stompie's brain when he swims toward Samuel, it is not casual. It is not an accident. It is the full weight of the animal's navigational intelligence being directed at a single chosen individual. Samuel, for his part, has not taken this lightly. He has organized his life around the bird's arrivals. He is an old man. In the years since Stompie first appeared, Samuel has gotten older, moved more slowly, had some health difficulties that he does not discuss in detail when visitors come. But he goes to the beach in the mornings because Stompie might arrive, and he will not let the bird come ashore and find no one. He buys pilchards when they are not in season, at higher cost, because Stompie prefers pilchards, and Samuel will not let him go hungry. He has spoken to journalists and wildlife researchers from Cape Town, from Johannesburg, from the United Kingdom, from abroad, not because he enjoys the attention, but because he wants people to understand what happened. He says repeatedly, with the directness of a man who has stopped caring what sounds foolish, "He is my friend. He loves me. I love him." And then he looks back at the water and waits. There have been years when the return was late. 2 separate times, the weeks passed the normal arrival window, and Stompie did not come, and Samuel sat with this in the way you sit with the possible death of someone you love. He went to the beach anyway. He bought pilchards anyway. He waited, and Stompie came. Late, but there, walking out of the water, finding the man. But time does not stop for love, and love does not stop time. Samuel is now in his 80s. Stompie, estimated to be about 14 to 16 years old as of this recording, is moving through the second half of his expected lifespan. African penguins in the wild live, on average, between 10 and 15 years, though individuals in protected environments have been documented living into their mid-20s. In the current era of ocean warming and prey displacement, the average lifespan of wild birds on the South African coast has shortened. Stompie is not young. Samuel is not young. Every seasonal arrival is now shadowed by the knowledge that it might be the last. The man is aware of this. He has said so. He does not say it with self-pity. He says it with the calm of someone who has received something he never expected and will not diminish it by asking for more. The threat to this story is not dramatic. It is not a villain. It is just the passage of time in a world where wild animals are not protected from the things that diminish them slowly and without announcement. The same warming currents that likely pushed Stompie off course and onto that oil-slicked beach in 2011 are still warming. The prey displacement that sent a starving penguin into the wrong stretch of coastline is still happening. The IUCN lists the African penguin as endangered, with population models that experts describe, in the careful language of science, as deeply concerning. If the currents continue to shift, if the pilchard stocks continue to thin, if the oil tanker routes that run through the Benguela system continue without adequate safeguard, then what happened to Stompie in 2011 will happen to more birds. Many of them will not find a Samuel. Stompie still comes. As of the most recent confirmed reports, he has been returning for more than a decade. He is older now, his feathers perhaps a little less crisp, his body a little more deliberate in the water. But he comes. He finds the beach. He finds the man. He presses himself against the man's leg, and they sit together watching the water come in, and no one who sees them can quite explain it. And that is the point. The things that most need explaining are sometimes the things explanation cannot touch. What do we make of this? Not of the biology, which is astonishing enough, but of the meaning? What do we do with a story in which a wild animal, free and migratory, capable of navigating thousands of kilometers of open ocean, chooses to orient its annual journey around the warmth of one human being? We have spent a very long time, as a species, constructing a story about ourselves that places us at the center of everything meaningful. We are the ones who feel. We are the ones who remember. We are the ones capable of love in its full weight and complexity. Animals feel things, we have conceded, but simpler things, less things, not the same things. This is a story we have told ourselves because it is convenient. It justifies the way we have organized the world, the fishing fleets and the oil routes, and the warming we have introduced into the water. Because if the creatures affected by those choices are only partially present in the world of feeling, then our choices are only partially grievous. Stompie does not know this story. He swims through it every year. He swims through warming water and displaced currents and the shadows of tanker hulls, and he comes to a beach on the Western Cape, and he finds a man who is old and tired and has pilchards in a bag, and the bird leans against the man's leg, and they watch the water together. And whatever is passing between them in that moment is not a lesser version of what we call love. It is not an echo of it, or an analogy to it, or a case study that illuminates it from a safe clinical distance. It is the thing itself, expressed in flippers instead of arms, in proximity instead of words, in 8,000 kilometers of open ocean swum year after year after year instead of a letter or a phone call or a knock on a door. We are not the only ones who remember. We are not the only ones who choose. We are not the only ones who cross distances that make no rational sense in order to be near the thing that made us feel safe when we were broken. That is what Stompie is telling us every season when he walks out of the water. Not with language, with his body, with his direction, with the full navigational intelligence of his ancient species aimed at a single gentle man on a beach. He is telling us that the capacity to love beyond the boundaries of logic or convenience or species or reason is not ours alone. It belongs to life. All of it. Every creature that has ever washed up, broken on a strange shore, and been held together by a stranger's hands knows something about what it means to choose to return. Every one of us who has ever been lost in water too cold and too empty, too far from the warm place where we were made, and found one person on one beach who did not look away, knows why the bird swims back. Samuel is on that beach right now, in the way that I mean it. Not literally, not this exact moment, but in the ongoing present of his life, he goes there. He goes because Stompie might come today. And the bird, somewhere in the South Atlantic, is swimming, moving through the cold upwelling of the Bengala, reading the pressure of the current, the way Samuel once read the weather, coming off the mountains above Hermanus. Moving toward a stretch of Western Cape coastline that smells like safety and pilchards, and the hands of one old man who picked him up out of the rocks more than a decade ago and decided, for no reason that science can fully account for, to save him. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment. Write down what you felt. Write down what you were thinking when you understood what it means for an animal to swim 8,000 kilometers to be with one person. These stories need to move. They need to reach the people who have forgotten that the world is full of this kind of love, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be chosen, washing up on beaches in places we were not expecting. Share this. Tell someone. And if you want to be here when the next story arrives, subscribe. Not because the algorithm needs it, though it does. Because you decided today that a 7-pound penguin and a 73-year-old man on a beach on the Western Cape are worth an hour of the world's attention. And you were right. There is one last image I want to leave you with. It is the same beach. Same cold sand. Same gray-green water running cold off the Bengala. Water that has no business being this cold this close to the African sun, but is, because the deep ocean keeps its own schedule regardless of what we want from it. An old man sitting on the sand in a canvas jacket and work boots, and walking out of the surf, unhurried, rolling from side to side with the gravity of something that has traveled a very great distance and is not in a hurry now that it has arrived, a small black and white animal who already knows exactly where he is going. He does not look left or right. He does not hesitate on the sand. He walks directly to the man's leg and presses himself against it, and the man puts his hand gently on the bird's back, and they both look out at the same water. And for a moment, in the pale morning light on a beach on the Western Cape, everything that was broken is beside something that chose to come back.